In the news tonight, the Prime Minister launches the 2017-2025 National Integrity and Anti-Corruption Strategy. The Syrian army's advance in Aleppo slows, and Russia says the army has stopped active military operations to remove civilians from the city. And Israeli forces kill a young Palestinian in the occupied West Bank. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. Prime Minister Hani Molki called on the Integrity and Anti-Corruption Commission to start in the new year enforcing national integrity criteria stipulated by new legislation. Speaking at a ceremony at Al Hussein Youth City to mark International Anti-Corruption Day, Molki said the Commission should ensure that the public administration heeds all integrity criteria. He urged the anti-graft body to start with the Prime Minister's management to ensure the soundness of policies and governmental measures, transparency of decisions, quality of services, good governance, justice and equal opportunity, rule of law and fighting nepotism and favoritism. During the ceremony dubbed Integrity a Collective Responsibility, Molki declared the launching of the 2017-2025 National Integrity and Anti-Corruption Strategy. He said Jordan shared with the international community its stand against corruption and the global concern about this malignancy and stressed a collective will to combat and eliminate it. Jordan, Molki said, takes the occasion to add its voice to the global anti-corruption consensus. He said the kingdom underlined its strong political will to counter corruption as a dangerous global phenomenon that had in the past years turned into a cross-border malignancy hitting societies and invading major global economies and organizations. The cabinet decided to disperse 20 dinars to each Jordanian student in public and military schools, with payments of up to 100 dinars for students from the same family. Acting upon a royal directive, the government will distribute the money to all students through the Cairo Amman Bank. State Minister for Media Affairs and Government spokesman Mohammed Al-Momani told a press conference that the Finance Ministry had prepared the list of students' families for the disbursement of the amount. In a meeting chaired by Prime Minister Hani Molki, the Cabinet also approved the strategic framework to streamline the labour and vocational training sectors, as well as a timeline plan for implementation. The ministers also approved an amendment of buildings and urban and rural development regulations. Momani said the Ministry of Municipal Affairs had taken proposals made by the Housing Developers Association before the amendment, including creating enough parking space in apartment buildings. Other regulations approved included banning trade in imports of position of fireworks without a license from the Interior Ministry and banning the entry of hazardous waste into the kingdom. Minister of Industry, Trade and Supply Yarab Quda said a free trade agreement signed by Jordan and the United States has given impetus to trade between the two countries. He told the annual meeting by the American Chamber of Commerce in Jordan that the two countries had strong ties and the commitment to further boosting them in various fields. The minister said the FTA, one of the most successful agreements Jordan had signed, focuses on textiles and garments with exports reaching $1.4 billion. U.S. Ambassador to Jordan, Alice Wells, said Jordan's export to the U.S. have increased and both countries will get mutual benefit from the agreement.
Under our free trade agreement, trade has grown from less than $400 million a year to the high point of $3.4 billion. And this year, for instance, Jordanian exports are increasing to the United States by over 5%. But I agree with you, we need to do more to increase those exports and diversify the products that are going to the United States. Right now, about 80% is textiles, which is terrific, and we love the garment sector, and we believe there's opportunity for growth there. But what we'd like to see is other sectors be as successful as the garment sector.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the Syrian army stopped active military operations in eastern Aleppo as a large effort to remove civilians from the city was underway. Lavrov was quoted as saying it had been agreed that Russia and US military experts would meet in Geneva on Saturday to discuss the situation in Aleppo. This report has more on the situation.
The Syrian army's advance in Aleppo slowed, but the government holds the upper hand. The army targeted rebels in besieged eastern Aleppo in fresh fighting. The army's advance slowed as rebels put up stiff resistance in Bustan al-Qasr district. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported heavy clashes, but said there was no new government advances. The army has in the past 2 weeks seized more than two-thirds of rebel-held eastern Aleppo, which had been in rebel hands for years. The rebels yesterday called for an immediate 5-day ceasefire and the evacuation of civilians and wounded, but they gave no indication they were ready to withdraw, as demanded by Damascus and its ally Moscow. Syria and Russia said they want rebels to leave Aleppo and will not consider a ceasefire unless that happens. UN Syria humanitarian advisor John England said Russia is no longer promising a pause in fighting in Aleppo, but it has agreed to discuss how to organize evacuations. Russia said it wants eastern Aleppo citizens to leave via 4 humanitarian corridors, although it will not let food go in to supply the hungry population. England said Russia had been told during a closed-door UN meeting that the creation of a humanitarian corridor meant a pause in the fighting.
Russia said they will definitely be discussing with us how to organize evacuation still, but they're not anymore promising any pause. So it will be very difficult. We will be working, including on those between 100 and 500 children have been identified as in need of evacuation for medical reasons.
The United Nations said it estimates about 33,000 people have been displaced in the past 10 days, including about 20,000 going into government-held areas. As he spoke in Geneva, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said after talks in Hamburg with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he was hopeful about reaching an agreement with Moscow over Aleppo, but added he was awaiting certain feedback and input. Kerry left a meeting of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe to head to Paris for further meetings on Syria. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
The Iraqi army pounded Daesh targets in Mosul in its bid to drive out the militant group from the city. The army's 9th Armored Division artillery shelled the district of Al-Quds from the army's positions in a nearby district. The long-awaited attack aims to relieve pressure on Iraqi counter-terrorism service troops who have spearheaded the fighting in eastern Mosul for the last month. Officers say they are engaged in fierce urban warfare, facing hundreds of suicide car bombers, snipers and militants exploiting a network of tunnels underneath residential areas to launch counter-attacks. Iraqi forces have also begun shelling parts of the West Mosul in preparation for a new front against Daesh, 7 weeks into the campaign to drive the militants from the city. US-led coalition warplanes also struck a building inside Salam Hospital complex, from which the militants were firing machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. Iraqi troops have seized the hospital deep inside Mosul on Tuesday, but pulled back the next day after a fierce counter-attack. Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank shot and killed a Palestinian. The occupation army claimed the man ran toward the troops stationed at a military checkpoint carrying a knife. It said the 18-year-old had got off a bus at a main West Bank junction and appeared suspicious to troops stationed there. The Palestinian Health Ministry confirmed the Palestinian had been killed, but had no further details on his identity. Israeli forces have killed at least 230 Palestinians in violence over the past 14 months. Palestinians and rights groups have accused Israeli police and soldiers of using excessive force against suspected Palestinian attackers. Also in the West Bank today, Israeli forces arrested 17 Palestinians during search and arrest raids in several towns. Indonesian medical teams struggled to treat scores of people injured in a 6.5 magnitude earthquake. The quake struck a day earlier, killing more than 100 people. Hundreds of buildings were toppled and thousands left homeless. The province of Aceh, on the northern tip of Sumatra Island, has declared a 2-week state of emergency. This report has more.
A day on from the quake that killed more than 100 people in Indonesia, rescue teams continue a desperate hunt for survivors. Emergency workers and volunteers combing the wreckage in search of signs of life, many of them picking up rubble piece by piece with only their hands. At least 5 aftershocks have been felt since the quake hit on Wednesday, authorities warning residents to sleep outside in case more buildings are brought down.
The focus is on searching and rescuing victims through close coordination under a state of emergency, while at the same time investigating and starting to reconstruct buildings.
More than 700 people are injured, some of them critically, and medical centers are stretched beyond their limits. Broken bones and gashes are being treated in hospital corridors, and health workers say there simply aren't enough staff to tend to the wounded. More than 1,000 people have been deployed for disaster relief, including officers from the military. One day on from the tragedy, they know they're in a race against time to find survivors as the critical 48-hour mark approaches in the wake of disaster.
Pakistan mourned the 47 victims of its deadliest plane crash in 4 years, including a famed rock star, as officials sought to pinpoint the cause of the disaster. Engine trouble was initially believed responsible, but many questions remain, sitting or stirring news worries about the safety record of money-losing state carrier Pakistani International Airlines. The ATR-42 aircraft involved in the crash had undergone regular maintenance. Here's more.
A search for answers after Pakistan's deadliest plane crash in 4 years. Investigators on Thursday picking through the wreckage of PK-661, a day after it plowed into the hills north of its destination, Islamabad, killing everyone on board.
We found 46 bodies here last night. When local young people heard about the crash, they all came to help with the recovery.
Rescue workers are now sending the bodies back to grieving families waiting in the capital. Many of the remains burned beyond recognition. The plane's black box has been recovered, but so far there's no clear sign of what caused the tragedy. Pakistan International Airlines says the plane passed a safety check in October and doesn't believe the accident was caused by technical or human error.
Around 4 o'clock, the control tower received a message that an engine had failed. After a few minutes, the Mayday calls started. Then the plane disappeared from radar.
The flight crashed just 30 miles short of the runway. On board, popular pop singer turned evangelical Muslim cleric Junaid Jamshed, plus a team of engineers from Australia and China, and 2 infants. Pakistan's airline industry has a poor safety record. 6 years ago, a passenger plane crashed in heavy rain near Islamabad, killing all 152 people on board.
Paris authorities extended driving restrictions as the French capital faces its worst air pollution in a decade. The city's authorities have imposed license plate-based driving restrictions, which they announced would be extended. The first time such a ban has been imposed for consecutive days. Paris banned cars from circulation based on whether their license plates ended with odd or even numbers. Several police checks were set up across the capital to stop and find drivers with banned numbers. On top of spot measures, the city of Paris intends to set up its fight against chronic pollution by gradually banning the oldest and most polluting cars or vehicles from the city center. Marat's Safin secured victory of the Japan Warriors in the International Premier Tennis League with an overtime win over Goran Ivanisevic. The Warriors ran out 23-20 winners after Fernando Verdasso and Kuromai Nara took the men's and women's single sets respectively. The Royals took both double sets to make the legends set between Safin and Ivanisevic the decider.
Center match, Japan Warriors. 23 games to 20.
A group of Afghan teenagers ducked out in a makeshift protective gear gathered on a dusty hill on the outskirts of the capital Kabul to practice a variety of freestyle cycling tricks they have learned from online videos via social media. Brushing aside suicide bombings, they are part of Afghanistan's first freestyle cycling club, Drop and Ride, established 2 months ago to help keep young Afghans from drugs, petty crime and violence. The biggest challenge Drop and Ride faces insecurity, as they are not confident about their safety when they go out for exercise. And finally, the weather outlook: a slight drop in temperature is forecast tonight, with relatively cold conditions in most regions but fair in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea. Light rainfall is also expected tonight, while frost formation is expected after midnight in the hilly areas and the Badia. Winds will be easterly to northeasterly moderate. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect milder conditions tomorrow, with a high of 21 degrees, northerly winds and somewhat choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here are top stories once again. The Prime Minister launches the 2017-2025 in National Integrity and Anti-Corruption Strategy. The Syrian army's advance in Aleppo slows, and Russia says the army has stopped active military operations to remove civilians from the city. And Israeli forces kill a young Palestinian in the occupied West Bank. And with that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Leo Balkar. Stay warm and enjoy your weekends.